The Grateful Dead.
Oh, Hunley, that was pretty good. Hold on, I'm almost done with this book.
All right. Well, whenever you're ready, we got a show to get going here.
Oh, okay. Welcome to the show. Holy cow, it's the Grateful Dead, Hunley. This is a special treat on a fun Friday somewhere in September, somewhere before we get to Halloween. But
and perfect timing. Apparently, Dead and Company announced today that they're going to be having their final tour.
Come on.
So we're giving them a send-off.
Oh, wow. Well, that vocals was from, that didn't match, but the vocals were Bill Graham at Winterland 1974, which was at that point the last concert. 1974. So, but the video was some home movie shot in Haight-Ashbury, presumably in 1968. But 6 years later, they would be at Winterland for their last show. And Bill Graham many times introduced them at the Fillmore, ladies and gentlemen, the Grateful Dead. So, very appropriate.
Perfect. And a way to separate the video from the sound and see. Okay, but actually, I want to get into that a little bit so everybody understands. This show, we're playing with fire. We're putting up a lot of clips, a lot of music. It's all in support of the band.
Right. It may not survive.
We're hoping it doesn't get blocked. And if it's copyright claimed, I'll probably just say to hell with it. We just won't worry about the money and leave it alone. But if anything's missing or anything's wonky, go to Rumble, go to our locals, because this is simul-streaming on Rumble right now. It'll be in great shape. We had a show, last week that we were off for 6 hours, but on Rumble, pristine to this day. So I just wanted to let everybody know that if anything blows up on this, go to Rumble. It'll help them out, help us out there. And we are trying to support the different platforms.
Hey, we may just get away with this crazy stunt, Hunley.
I don't know. But like I said, I'm not going to fight it too hard.
Fight power.
As long as the video stays up, I'm not going to squabble about the monetization.
Well, I mean, the Dead's all about sharing audio and videotapes, and if anyone will leave us alone, it's them and their fans.
Problem is that it's not up to the band; it's up to the labels.
I'm just
kidding. And those son of a bitches have no soul.
Right. Some of these people have websites and stuff, but that's not copywritten. Also, some of these guys that we're borrowing from, they're borrowing from.
Oh yeah, I mean, again, I just want to put that out early because.
Well, let's see if we can get away with this with the Grateful Dead movie.
Okay,
that's now unlocked and apparently for use by the public. From 1977, it was released. It was shot in 1974 at their peak, and I wanted to see maybe we could play just one song, and if it's cut right here. But give the people a flavor of what the Dead were like at their peak.
All right, let's see. We've got. I think this one's done because you have to depend on Google to process.
We just wanted to give you a flavor of it. It does, it doesn't have the impact of being live, but that wall of sound in back of them and those dual mics were designed by a guy named Owsley Bear Stanley III. Owsley Bear Stanley III was the grandson of Owsley Stanley I, who oddly enough was the congressman, senator, and then governor of the great state of Kentucky. So Owsley Bear Stanley III, there he is getting arrested. That's his arraignment in San Francisco. He created the wall of sound. I don't know if you have a picture of that. Maybe you could see what he created because he was a mad scientist in terms of acoustics, created those dual mics. There's the wall of sound. That might be 1974, 73. It took 2 tractor trailers. There were actually 2 copies of it because one would go ahead to the next show and one would be here. He actually had 2 of these and just absolutely gigantic I think like 240. Yeah, look at that. Look at that. That's breathtaking. That's as they're erecting it at a venue. There's the schematics for it. Yeah, any of these deadhead audio guys who are out there might appreciate that, what they were doing with the sound back there. This will be a little later, but I just wanted to get into Owsley for a second. That thing had 604 speakers and 26,400 watts of audio power that it could go for 2 miles. The sound of it clearly for, I think, 1.75 miles. And then the dual mics were designed to prevent feedback, which they would have a lot of in the Woodstock clip that I gave you. I don't know if you have that one where they're playing at Woodstock in 1969, because that was a song called Mama Tried, which was, of course, Merle Haggard's hit.
Yeah, I got to pull it from another source. I do have it.
Okay. Well, anyway, to get back to Owsley, Owsley was a mad scientist. He distributed and created what later became known as Owsley acid. And he distributed 1.25 million tabs of acid between 1965 and 1967. And Owsley blues, the purple barrels, to be more specific, were considered the greatest acid in America. Just so people know who we're talking about.
I've heard the name.
Yeah, this is, we're just going to jump ahead to Woodstock, some minor event I went to, but this was in the middle of the night, and the Dead didn't make it into the movie or the album for reasons of torrential rain, lightning, this being 2:00 in the morning. I think they played about 4 songs or 5 songs and split. Now, the reason is because sparks were flying. It was ungrounded. This was not their sound system, keep in mind. So those microphones are not Owsley's. The sound system's not the Wall of Sound. This is from Michael Lang. Sparks were flying from those microphones to their lips as they were playing. At one point, Jerry just says, "What the fuck is going on? We're going to get electrocuted here." But let's play this, and I'll give you an example of what they were about musically.
Last thing I remember knowing was a lonesome whistle blowing and the young tree growing up to right. On the great train leaving town, never knowing where I was bound. No one changed my mind but Mama cried. I'm an only rebel child in a family making mine. Mama seemed to know what lay in store. But all my Sunday learning was the bad I kept on turning. Mama wouldn't hold me anymore.
Okay, so that was just to get a flavor. I just want you to understand. The reason the Dead were important was not because they were a jam band. It was because they opened the door to American roots music, to people like myself who had no understanding about country music, no understanding about blues music, no understanding about jazz music. All of that was funneled through the Grateful Dead. That was, of course, the legendary Merle Haggard, Mama Tried. They also made hits out of El Paso by Marty Robbins. They played a bunch of Haggard tunes. They played a bunch of Chuck Berry songs. They were an eclectic band that was really about American roots music, and not so much as they are known as a jam band, the first jam band, of course. But they were able to bring to American youth all these various types of music that were segregated, Eric, in various regional pockets of the United States. There is a young Jerry, when he was a folkie, he was a masterful banjo player and had a jug band way before the Dead. He played like a Peter, Paul, and Mary and then a banjo thing. And he became a master of bluegrass. And that is also influential because Jerry taught himself how to play the banjo. Jerome Garcia, not Mexican, of Spanish and German roots, was named after Jerome Kern, the famous Broadway musical writer and lyricist. And his father was a professional musician in big bands. His mother was also musical. And at the age of 4, in the mountains, he was in Northern California. and in the mountains where they had a wood cutting machine, he cut off his finger at the age of 4, Eric, and his brother had to rush him out of the mountains and tried to salvage the finger to no avail. And he had to learn how to play guitar with the, there it is. Yeah, there's the great shot of the missing right middle finger, the F finger, if you may want to call it that. And he had to develop a special style of playing guitar. There's a close-up of the missing digit. Years ago, I don't know how this happened to me, but I'll explain it later in the show. I was able to go to an auction and actually purchase that finger. And it's one of the rarest part of my collection, the actual finger that was cut off in that sawmill when Jerry Garcia was, I think, 4.5 at that point. And I could go with you. Here is the finger itself. If you want to take a close-up of the finger from my collection, there is the finger of Jerry Garcia. You get a close-up of that. It's been around for a while. If you could see that on the camera there. I think you're muted, Hunley, actually, but
he was a large child. My God,
he was a large child, and somehow they say when the Dead announce a tour, this was going back to 65, I think, the finger moves. I don't know what that's about, but every time they announce some kind of a tour, the finger comes to life. And I think we'll come back at Halloween when they're touring and revisit that. But a year after the finger incident, he's up in Northern California with his father fly fishing, and his father falls into the river and he watches him drown. And yeah, it was very traumatic. And he realized that life was not going to be as smooth as a suburban family. His father drowns in the river, a bunch of other. Yeah, that's him, I think, about 8 or 9, maybe 10. But at 5, he watches his own dad drown in the river. Some other fishermen try to bail him out, but to no avail. And so his life becomes this. His father owned a bar, and it's up by Palo Alto, and his father died. So the mother took over the bar, ran the bar, and the kids had a lot of free time to run around and do crazy crap, having no parental authority. He was actually raised by his grandparents. So he forms these different bluegrass bands and begins to pick and grin around that area, playing these different gigs. And he hooks up with a guy named Phil Lesh. And Phil Lesh is an avant-garde classical trumpet player from the area, knows nothing about rock and roll, doesn't want to hear about it. And Jerry says to him, I want you to play bass in my band. I know you don't know how to play bass, but you're musically a savant. So I think you could pick up how to play bass. And Phil Lesh takes the challenge and learns how to play electric bass, which was relatively a new instrument, electric bass. And he kind of studies Jack Cassidy, the bass player of the Airplane, and some other friends, but he has to kind of figure it out on his own. Then he goes to this guy, Bill Kreutzmann. And Kreutzmann is the drummer who becomes his friend, and he brings Kreutzmann into the band. Now, Kreutzmann will be in the band even now. I mean, Bill Kreutzmann, there's babyface Bill Kreutzmann. He
looks like John Cusack or something.
Yeah, in a weird way. He does look like Cusack. But later on, they're going to say he looks like Bill Murray, which is kind of funny when he gets older. But it's a funny thing about Kreutzmann because he's playing at the age of 13, he's practicing in a room in his high school, junior high school. And a guy walks in and says, you're going to be great. I like everything I'm hearing. Keep it up, kid. And that man was Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. You can't make this up. He's just walking through the high school, Aldous Huxley, and here's
as one would
in Northern California. And he runs into Bill Kreutzmann, and Kreutzmann says it inspired him the rest of his life because he got kicked out of music school by his own music teacher who said, you're never going to be a musician, son, and failed him in music class in high school. So that was kind of weird. But so anyway, so the Owsley acid, by the way, is the acid that is given to Jimi Hendrix at Monterey And that's the smile that's on Jimi Hendrix's face at the Monterey Pop Festival is from Owsley Purple Barrels, which are going to come back a little bit later in the story. But they pick up a keyboard player named Tom Constantine, who is the guy playing keyboards on some of the original thing. He doesn't stick around that long, Constantine, but they also pick up a guy who's one of these folkies named Robert Hunter. Now, Robert Hunter is really important because Robert Hunter will become the lyricist for the Grateful Dead. There's an early shot of Robert Hunter. Yeah, he will work closely with Jerry Garcia writing all their songs behind the scenes. And Hunter, like Tom Constantine, oddly enough, are Scientologists. And yeah, Constantine is a weirdo. He was in the Air Force and a weird guy. Robert Hunter, also a weird guy, but Hunter will leave the church after he begins to get into acid and writing songs like China Cat Sunflower and Jackstraw from Wichita and some of the classic Dead songs. He will begin to leave the Church of Scientology. You can't make this up, Eric. After we just did the episode, two of the Dead guys peripherally were in the church for a number of years. So that's kind of weird. So they begin to get a lyricist, and they've got this drummer, and they pick up another drummer. And this is kind of weird because bands didn't have two drummers, right? So they've got this guy shows up named Mickey Hart. And Mickey Hart is the weirdest guy in the entire group. He gets picked up and joins the group. And Mickey Hart is really Mickey Hartman. And he is a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. So how he ends up in this band, he's from Flatbush. There's Mickey Hart. He is the oddest thing in this entire band. And he ends up being raised on Long Island, of all places. I think in Cedarhurst, Long Island. And I think his father was a guy named Lenny Hart, who I don't even know how to explain this, but Lenny Hart is a con man and a hustler who becomes a phony preacher and comes out to the West Coast at the time that his son, Mickey Hart, joins the band. And somehow Lenny Hart briefly becomes their manager of the Grateful Dead. In one of the strangest, they had a bunch of managers, all of them ripped them off, and Rock Scully, I think, but all of these guys, not all of them, but a couple of them ripped them off. So Lenny Hart, aka Lenny Hartman, embezzles $150,000 from the Dead and spreads it out in multiple bank accounts around California, and then disappears in the middle of the night. It's $150,000 in 1971 money. So what is that? 600,000, 700,000 today, Eric?
It's good money. Yeah, maybe $1 million. It'd be hard to know.
So they find him in San Diego preaching to a cult. He becomes the leader of some sort of religious cult, Lenny Hart, and he's arrested by the FBI. The Dead get back about 63,000 out of the 150,000 that he embezzled. So they did get some return from this. But because of the embarrassment of this, Mickey Hart leaves the band. Does not return for a number of years because he blames himself for having his father infiltrate behind the lines of the Dead and do this, which is kind of weird, So they don't blame him. The Dead never blame Mickey Hart. But he blames himself, and he leaves and will later come back in a number of years for this show, which we were just showing, the 1974 Winterland show. Mickey Hart comes out in the second half of that show, and it's his return to the Grateful Dead, and not unnoticed by Deadheads at that time. It was a big deal at the time. Now, also a big deal is this guy Pigpen. Now, Pigpen is kind of like, I want to say, the Brian Jones in relation is Pigpen. Pigpen's like the Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones. And what I mean by that is Pigpen was a front man of the Dead. He was the lead singer. He played a Hammond B3 organ. He played harmonica. His father was a blues musician. He was a professional blues musician. The original Dead, which were the Warlocks, then became the Dead, the Grateful Dead. And you say, well, how did they get that name, Eric? Well, okay, there's a shot of Pigpen named after the character in Peanuts because of his, let's just say, uncleanly, unkempt style of living. And so
the hygiene issue, is
yes,
what you're
the
saying?
hygiene issue, and he looked like Pigpen. So
Jesus.
there he is. So Pigpen didn't do acid. He didn't smoke weed. He just drank as a blues guy, right? That was what his thing was. And he fronted this band. It was his band, but he kept drinking too much, and eventually, it became too much for even him. But the Warlocks were the name of the band, and they found out that another band had the name the Warlocks, and they couldn't keep that name, even though the other band found out that they had the name the Warlocks. And this is really a weird rock and roll story. And the two bands named the Warlocks find out each other exists on the East Coast in New York, the West Coast in San Francisco, and say, we got to change the name.
And they both changed them.
Right. So neither one was Warlocks. Right. The other band took another bizarre name. They chose the name The Velvet Underground.
Oh, shit. I was wondering. I knew it had to be somebody crazy different.
Right. Okay. So they're sitting around the Phil Lesh and Garcia, and they open up Funk and Wagnall's dictionary, and they said, okay, we got to get a name. Let's just, whatever we open up to, right? So they open a book, puts his finger down, and says Grateful Dead. And Grateful Dead, by definition, is the ghosts or the spirits that come out of a dead person who is grateful that someone is giving them a proper burial and send-off. That's what's called Grateful Dead. And they looked at each other and they went, oh, this is it. Grateful Dead. You're grateful that, not grateful that you're dead. You're grateful that someone is taking care of you in terms of burial, casket, funeral after you're dead. And they went, oh, that's us.
Was it spelled that way though? I mean, did they deliberately?
Yes. Yeah. It was Grateful Dead. Yeah. So they kept that. Yeah. And people thought it was from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Not true. Not true. It's Funk and Wagnall's. It was Funk and Wagnall's dictionary, which was always said by Johnny Carson because he loved the name because it sounded like F-U-C-K. He was always going.
Right. Well, it's comedy. I mean, what is it? Webster's doesn't flow as well for comedy.
Right.
Funk and Wagnall sounds funny.
Right. Okay. So they get a guy. They go down to Colorado Springs, and there's a guy down there, kid. He's like 15, right? And he's the weirdest guy in the band, just my opinion and other people's opinions. I don't know. But he's an adopted kid who's produced by two college kids and who mate. And he's born to these two college kids who are in college. And they put him up for adoption, and that's Bob Weir. And Bob Weir is adopted by a couple in Colorado Springs. And at the age of 15, Jerry Garcia comes down there to do some teaching or something, guitar teaching, and meets Bob Weir and says, would you like to be in my band? And Weir says, yes. And he's 15 years old, so he doesn't know anything. But Bob Weir has a weird friend, and he has his own lyricist named John Perry Barlow. Now, this name is going to get his own show because John Perry Barlow is one of the weirdest guys ever affiliated with the Grateful Dead. And he writes Mexicali Blues. He writes Black-Throated Wind. He writes Cassidy. There's a shot a little bit later of Weir, who was kicked out of the band, by the way, with Pigpen because the Dead said, you don't know how to play your instruments and we can't carry you anymore. Pigpen, of course, for drinking. Weir for being an amateur guitar player who sucked. And they kick him out of the band at one point, both of them. And Pigpen says, all right, whatever, I'm just going to drink. But Weir just goes crazy to learn guitar. And he comes back like a year later or 9 months later, and he's massively improved playing rhythm guitar and singing. And he essentially becomes the lead singer of the Dead because Pigpen can no longer tour. Now, Pigpen is doing stuff like Turn On Your Love Light. Pigpen is like Muddy Waters. I mean, this guy is like the Big Bill Brunsey. It's supposed to be a blues band. The reason I mentioned Brian Jones is because the Stones were a blues band, and Brian Jones was the brain and frontman and good-looking guy before Mick Jagger. It was Brian Jones, and I did an episode for VH1 a number of years ago called "The Murder of Brian Jones." If anybody wants to see that,
it's on Locals. Yeah.
Oh, it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, go on Locals. Yeah, you'll see that. This is like in 2001. I used to do VH1 stuff, so that's why I got the tie-dyed shirts. I used to be in. I was in the rock and roll world, but anyway, so
the biz.
Yeah, this is in the biz. My backstage passes. Look, I got a few of them here, but anyway, so Weir hooks up with this guy John Perry Barlow. Now, John Perry Barlow is a guy from Harvard. He's a songwriter. He's a screenwriter. He's a rancher. He's from Wyoming. He starts something called the Electronic Freedom Foundation. Eric, you ever hear of that on the internet?
Rumored.
Right. Okay. He creates that. He's a libertarian. He writes the manifesto about the internet. He is there at the beginning. This is obviously into the 80s and 90s now. But at the beginning, he and Weir worked together on various songs that became Grateful Dead songs. But that's not all that Perry. Yeah, there he is. That's later on. But John Perry Barlow is a libertarian, tons of acid. He gets into Owsley acid, another guy who's completely lysergic. And he now, as a libertarian in 1978, runs the congressional campaign of a guy from Wyoming trying to get into Congress. And that man is Dick Cheney.
Oh, my God.
No, you can't make this up, Hunley. These are the craziest threads go through the Grateful Dead. Now, I just want to go back a little bit where we started with the Dead, because at the beginning, the Dead are playing these LSD festivals called acid tests. Now, the acid tests are put on by Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters. You say, well, who are Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters? What do they have to do with this? Everything overlaps in this storyline. This is Ken Kesey. He wrote One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, became a Broadway play, then became a movie. He wrote Sometimes a Great Notion, one of the great American novelists of his time.
Gets his own show.
What's that?
He'll get his own show, right?
Yeah, he's going to get his own show. But just to get briefly into Kesey, he goes to Stanford University, and he sees a sign to take medical experiments, right? So he goes in, and in this psychiatric ward, not at Stanford, they go to a psychiatric ward, he is given a new experimental unknown secret drug called lysergic acid. And he's given LSD-25 in this experiment, which we now know was run by the CIA through MK Ultra, which is clearly delineated in the O'Neill book, Chaos, and other publications. So one of the first, not victims, he didn't see himself as a victim. He saw himself as an adherent.
He stole it, if I recall, didn't he?
Ken Kesey begins to go crazy, loving the acid, and everybody spreads out the acid. Owsley becomes friends with Kesey. Owsley begins manufacturing the acid. He gets the secret formula, and Owsley, the chemist, begins creating Owsley acid. That's where it comes from. And the purple barrels that Owsley created will then be distributed at various shows around the country through the Grateful Dead network. And so Kesey and the Merry Pranksters are a group of people who are bridging the gap between Jack Kerouac and the hippies. Between the beatniks and the hippies, there is an overlap, and that is from Ken Kesey. There's Ken Kesey, and there is Neal Cassady. Now, Neal Cassady, who's driving the bus, is a speed freak. Neal Cassady is Dean Moriarty in On the Road. He was Jack Kerouac's best friend. So the link between Kerouac and the hippies is this guy, Neal Cassady. You see him there at the wheel of the bus, probably about 45 years old at that time, becomes massively addicted to methamphetamine, does not stop talking for 5 years. He drives the bus, handsome guy, absolutely muscle bound. He writes his whole book about him, really. On the Road is really the story of Dean Moriarty, who is Neal Cassady. So Neal Cassady hooks up with Kesey up in Northern California. Kesey buys a school bus, and they paint it up with day-glow colors and put all the Merry Pranksters in there. But they rig up a sound system in the bus. They put in, this is the acid test graduation version, but they customized this bus inside with sound and video and all kinds of different things. They cut a hole in the roof and they put a bubble in the back, and there's all kinds of different things. And it had beds in there. It had bunk beds in there. It was owned by a guy who customized it for his family. And I think Kesey bought it for the equivalent of about $15,000 to $20,000 at that time. Yeah, you could see in the back of it. That's years later. It's kind of beat up. That's in the 90s. But in reality, everybody gets on board this bus and takes acid and drives across the country to New York to meet Jack Kerouac, which we'll get into later. I don't want to get into it now because that's going to be a separate story of America's Untold Story, the meeting of the two cultures, which is an incredible story, which we'll get into. But just for argument's sake, they have these acid tests, the one you saw, the graduation. And these acid tests are in San Francisco and the surrounding areas in warehouses, and they would project videos onto a wall. They would have tape recordings and sounds. This is an original flyer. Allen Ginsberg would be there reading poetry, the Merry Pranksters. And the sound, the band, the house band for these acid tests were the Grateful Dead. And that's where the Dead comes into play and into being into the acid culture, is through the acid test put on by Ken Kesey. Now,
was Jefferson Airplane also involved, or just
yeah.
the Dead?
No. The Airplane was there too. There was an overlap of different bands, and they varied. They weren't even gigs. Lesh talked about the fact they weren't really gigs. We would just show up, and then if we played, we played. If we didn't, we didn't. Nobody really cared what we were doing. But they were used on the flyers, and they did play, and they did take acid. And there were two types of punch. There was the electric Kool-Aid acid test, which is what this is about, by Tom Wolfe. If you want to read a book about all this, this is obviously the best book ever written on that sort of situation. Now, they had the electric Kool-Aid and then the regular Kool-Aid. So they were side by side. You could drink regular Kool-Aid, or they would give you like a couple of ladles of the electric Kool-Aid, which is all you really needed. If you drank too much of it, you really didn't know what you were getting. So, the most just so you know the understanding of the numbers here. I'm kind of an aficionado in this one area.
I see. Shall we talk?
Yes, statute of limitations, I could talk, but 1,000 micrograms of window pane and some of my friends out there in the audience know this. You know who I'm talking to. 1,000 micrograms of pure window pane is a pretty large LSD trip. 250 micrograms of blotter was kind of like a normal low-level acid trip. 250 micrograms. 1,000 mics of pure window pane was for veterans, people who were doing it. Now, if you really were a veteran, you might have gotten into taking liquid acid out of an eyedropper with Al Franken and Dan Aykroyd, like I did. But that's for another episode of America's Untold Stories. We'll get into that later in another story. But right now, we're going to focus on the Grateful Dead. So the Dead, and Jerry Garcia gets the name Captain Trips. If you could show that photo of Jerry with the top hat, that's a classic Captain Trips photo of Jerry Garcia. There he is. I mean, that's really the Captain Trips, and they're living in San Francisco in this house. If you have any video of the brownstone they were living in, Eric, that's the first Dead house, 710 Ashbury, the 710 house. They will later go out in the country a little bit more, but at the beginning, they're living urbanly for a number of years, hand to mouth, in this one house, multiple floors. And a lot of people rented these incredible mansions that were probably now they're $10 million. But when the Haight-Ashbury tourist tours were coming by, this whole street here, I think that's the block that they lived on. A little bit south of the Panhandle, if you look on a map of San Francisco. But they all lived in that house. The house was raided by the police. They were arrested for marijuana. Owsley was arrested. Owsley went to jail. They were constantly being harassed. So I think they moved out to the country a little bit to get away from that, being so close to the police. But I think that's the house there.
Here live the Grateful Dead, a
Oh, go ahead.
popular rock group whose bachelor home life ranges from the bizarre to the beatific. But more often than not, the huge flat pulses to an ordinary beat.
The Grateful Dead are roar rockers. They're the rockers that roar, the rock and rolls that blast out sound. Beautiful freak out zap style.
It's a National Steel guitar. Jerry's trying to learn how to play pedal steel, which he does later.
There's a real grace inherent within the ability to make in a room a kind of continuous, simultaneous altar of four walls to present paintings and wood and precious objects and stones and dripping candles and reflections of light in new ways from new sources on a multiplicity of the awarenesses of what's going on, to be able to move as a group from room to room and present yourself in a new situation, to conceive of like human pleasure as a dramatic situation, to be able to be comic about it, to be able to be beautiful about it.
Oh, there's a shot. Yeah. Anyway, so this is a little bit inside of how they lived as a band. So they were able to rehearse together and have this band house and live together and practice together. Before, you know, the band never really had a record deal. I mean, they end up on Warner Brothers, but really they don't have any money for decades. And what happens is they put out literally two classic albums that are studio masterpieces, Wake of the Flood, 1974, and Working Man's Dead, a couple of years before that. These are two Warner Brothers records that are engineered perfectly. The sound is perfect. The two great albums of the Grateful Dead, studio albums, Working Man's Dead and Wake of the Flood. The other albums are live albums that are, I don't know, American Beauty is a studio album, but it's not the greatest in the world. And Aoxomoxoa is another studio album that's not the greatest in the world. But the cover art and the art for these things, the Dead develop a family of not just people who are running their business, but also artists like Mouse and Kelly, who developed the skull and bones and the Grateful Dead image of the dead head of the skeleton, all of that stuff, all of that, the roses and the skeletons and all that stuff was designed by a guy named Stanley Mouse and another guy named Anton Kelly, who become the artists for the Grateful Dead, designing all of their album covers and everything else. So you're talking about an entire operation where they're supporting an entire family, the Dead, when they go on the road. And they have that wall of sound. They start bringing trucks. And the only money they make, which is substantial, is from touring. This is not a band that's going to make any number one hits. The closest they came to was Truckin', I think, which charted. I don't know where Truckin' ended up on various charts, but
Something in the years also. I think it was their biggest song.
That I'm not sure. It may have come in later. There may be some later because
it was a later song. I forgot the name of it, but it
right. This is all designed. All the roses and the skeletons and everything that is the image of the Grateful Dead were designed by two guys who were the contemporaries of Crumb, who are Kelly and Mouse, and they become part of the Grateful Dead family. Now, you'll see shirts, you'll see everything else related to that, but it all comes back to these guys.
Touch of Grey.
Oh, Touch of Grey. Yeah. Okay. That might have been it. Yeah. That was a big hit for them, or probably the only hit for them, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I believe so. I think that was the only top 40 hit that they ever had, if I recall.
Wow. Well, as Weir said, Trucking got to the top of the charts, but only in Turlock, California, as he says, introducing it one day. And they played it every single place they went, and they added on different things. But in
Kesey Jones was big too.
Kesey Jones was big. It's also coming off of Working Man's Dead. Now, the reason Working Man's Dead is important is because it's an entire Roots album. It's an entire album of country kind of urban roots music that is a re-exploration that the band also does with Robbie Robertson and Garth Hudson and Levon Helm. So there's this movement that even Clapton hears about it in Europe, and the Europeans are stunned by this sound because they have no connection to this sound. The European rock and roll people from Clapton on down, the Cream and everything else, they don't know what this is. They have never heard any of this roots music. So they come off as the Stones and Cream. They're all blues cover bands at the beginning. I mean, Weir says that his biggest influence is the Beatles, but that's Weir. The rest of them are coming from a blues background, country background. I mean, Haggard lived up there. Merle Haggard was from up there. A lot of the influence was from Buck Owens, and Buck Owens is guitar.
Bakersfield area?
Yeah, it's all Bakersfield. It's all
okay.
Which is kind of where they're from. So Haggard's from Bakersfield. Buck Owens is from Bakersfield. There are people in Jerry's influence circle that influence him guitar-wise, from Albert King to Buck Owens's guitar player in the country realm, and it's a very eclectic combination of sounds that Jerry incorporates into his world, and he wants to improvise, so they become this improvisational band because one of his main influences, John Coltrane, and he's playing on guitar where Coltrane is playing on sax, and nobody understands that. But in 1970 at the Fillmore West, Bill Graham understands that because he has a band open for the Dead in 1970 at the Fillmore West, and the band is fronted by an obscure jazz trumpet player named Miles Davis. And Miles Davis brings out this band called Bitches Brew with Chick Corea and Jack DeJohnette, and that band opens for the Dead. And that becomes that fusion sound of Bitches Brew that Miles creates. And
another Scientologist.
I know. It's weird. I don't know what's going on there, but later on in 1991, in September 10th, in a show I went to at Madison Square Garden, jumping ahead to 1991, the Dead played in the band with Branford Marsalis, the famous jazz saxophone player. So this was something the Dead dabbled in all the time. And in 1987, they toured with Bob Dylan, which became a legendary tour. Not such a great album, but the tour was legendary because there's Dylan and the Dead, because Bob and them they were covering a lot of Bob songs anyway. So Bob goes on the road with the Dead for a year almost. In 87, this album comes out. Doesn't get great reviews, but it's still pretty good. At the end of the tour, Dylan says, "This is great. I'd like to be in the band. How do I become a member of the Dead?" And they go, "What?" He says, "Yeah, I'm tired of being Bob Dylan. I'd rather just be in a band." And he's referring to what he did with Robbie Robinson and Levon Helm, where that was a traveling show with him and the band, right?
Who were the band, right?
Right. And he was integrated into the band. It wasn't like Bob Dylan and the band. He was part of that operation in '66 and going to England and everything. Don't Look Back, the D.A. Pennebaker movie, which is highly recommended if you want to see what happens, the birth of rock and roll, is through D.A. Pennebaker's eyes for the movie Don't Look Back. But what he wants to do, he's tired of being Bob Dylan by 87 by himself. So he wants to be in a band. The family, the whole thing, there's girls. I mean, who wouldn't want to be in the Dead? You know what I mean? So Sherry and Lesh are shocked. They go, but you're Bob Dylan. We can't just have you in the band. I mean, people are going to notice. So Bob says, "Hey, man, I just want to be in the band." Yeah. So they said, "All right, everything we do, we have to vote on, and we go by," which is true. Every single thing they ever did was by majority vote, the band, right? And so they take a vote, and they come back, and they sit Bob down. They go, "Bob, we got bad news. We voted you out." And he goes, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, we voted. It was like 11-9 or whatever. Whoever voted, they're 6-5. And I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." He goes, "All right, I guess it's time for my boot heels to be wandering." And Bob just goes off to religious Bob. He becomes Christian Bob at that point, joins the Vineyard in Southern California, and does some other stuff, which we'll get into in a Bob episode. But in 1973, Pigpen dies, and he dies of, not surprisingly, cirrhosis of the liver, March 8th, 1973, to be exact. And
how old was he?
He was pretty young. He was not an older guy. I think he was like 40-ish or something, late 30s. I mean, yeah, that's him in the middle there. That's Kreutzmann and Jerry, Pigpen, Lesh, and Bob Weir. Yeah, Pigpen drank himself to death, and everybody knew that. But on 3/18/73, 10 days or 9 days after his death, I went to the Nassau Coliseum, and there was the first show after Pigpen's death. And they did a second song they did that night was a song they usually played called He's Gone. And Donna Gottschall was there. Keith Gottschall would later die in a car crash. But this 73 show, there's Keith Gottschall. Yeah, he's on keyboards. He's going to replace Pigpen, which he did the year before. So Keith Gottschall replaces Pigpen, who was actually playing with Tom Constantin for a while. And this is his wife, who is the background singer. She was linked to a lot of other bands. So she was a professional background singer. They would have marital difficulties, begin fighting right after the show. Pigpen died when he was 27. Yeah, the thanks, Bill. Like everybody else. And
right.
Right. So he looked like he was 47. That's why it was a little confusing. But anyway, so Gottschall replaces him. And that night they did a cover of He's Gone in dedication to, they didn't even say Pigpen, everybody knew it. And it went on for like 20. If you ever find a copy of this He's Gone from that show, people were weeping in the audience that night, and I was one of them. The death of Pigpen was so profound because it was his band at the beginning. He was the front of that band. Now, granted, he hadn't played with them for a couple of years, but even Jerry and Lech said it was his band. He was the front guy. That's why Garcia, is awkwardly singing, and then Weir eventually steps up as the lead singer of the band. But that's a different version than what the band started out to be, in 67 and 66. But that being said, with Pigpen dead, that 73 show is the beginning of having the Gottschalls on piano and background singing to Weir, and the 3-part harmonies that they developed, 4 parts if you bring in Phil Lesh, who has a very deep tenor voice, later baritone. But he has some, I don't know, something happens with his vocal cords years later. But this leads us in 1974 to a show I wanted to talk about that I went to. I don't know how many Dead concerts I went to, but to answer the Ziggy question, quite a few. But this one was special because this was may have been the largest. There's different measurements here. There's 600,000 people, and this was in northern New York State, July 28th, 1973. So we had just gotten out of high school, and me and Bozo and Hamburger and Fishman drove up.
Of course.
Those are the 4 guys, right?
The names, dude.
Me, Bozo, Fishman, and Hamburger drove up. I don't know, I forget whose car it was, but it was like a 9-hour drive to this summer jam, Allman Brothers, the Dead, and the band. Now, this was considered to be, the mother lode of a bill, right? Okay. So 600,000 people show up. Some people say the World Book of Records, Guinness, was there, and they said this may have been the largest gathering of any group of people in the history of the world. Never mind concerts, because it was 200,000 more people than even Woodstock. This was 600,000 people, Eric. And I think they may have sold like 300,000 legitimate tickets. I don't know. I don't know. You know what I mean? And then 300,000 just walked in. But,
so it was like Woodstock then, where they just gave up.
Exactly. And it rained like Woodstock too, again, because, hot summer, upstate New York, the same thing, mud, same thing happened. So, but these 3 bands were super professional and knew how to operate. They were 3 veteran bands that were unfazed by anything. So we get up there, just to give you a detail of this, we get up there the night before. Who's we? Me, Hamburger, Bozo, and Fishman, but there's also 75,000 other people with us at night, Friday night, sitting in front of that stage. So Robbie Robertson asked Bill Graham, who's always involved in these things, or whoever was there as the field producer, if they could have a sound check. So the band came out and did a sound check. The Allman Brothers came out and did a sound check, and the Dead came out and did a sound check. So it was an entire concert the night before on Friday night, just of the sound check. And we're sitting there going, we stumbled into this. We just got there. We're just sleeping there in the field, waiting till the next day. Because to get there on Saturday would have been a nightmare. So everybody went on Friday. Everybody left the city on Friday to go up to Watkins Glen, which is a racetrack, by the way. NASCAR, I think, racetrack. I'm not really sure if they still have that. But the next day, there was, again, these purple barrels, Eric. So of these Owsley purple barrels, right? So I'm looking at a guy, and he's dancing on top of a portishead. The show hasn't started yet. And he's on top to my left. I just can't get enough of watching this guy in a portishead. So eventually the Dead come out. They play the first set. The Dead come out, and they open up with Bertha. It was my favorite Dead song of all time. And I look over to the guy who's dancing on top of the portishead, and he goes through the roof. And I went, holy shit, he's a dead man. He's going down through the roof into the hole. And I run through the crowd. Now I am on these purple barrels of Owsley. And I open the door. It's on the other side, the portishead on the other side. And there's nobody in there. And I'm completely spooked. And I'm yelling down in the hole, reach up for me, reach up. And there's a hole filled with feces and urine. And I think the guy went down because I saw him crash through the roof. There's a hole through the roof, Eric. And he crashes down legitimately. And he must have just gone out the door, But I thought in my lysergic analysis that he what?
Analysis. I like that. Lysergic analysis.
I thought he went through the hole. Anyway, so I go back to where we were sitting, and the band comes out and plays Bertha. And they do 2 complete sets. This is Saturday. Think about this concert. The Dead plays for 4 hours, right? It's rain, it's hot. They don't give a shit. They play 2 complete sets. They leave, they come back, and they do another set. And now the band comes out. They come out with Up on Cripple Creek, blowing the fucking place. I'm sorry, blowing the stands out of this place. They play for 2 hours, the band, completely at the top of their game. They will later go back to Winterland 2 years later for an obscure movie directed by Martin Scorsese called The Last Waltz. At the same place the Dead did the Grateful Dead movie, directed by Jerry Garcia, by the way, that movie. Anyway, so now what happens to the Allman Brothers? They come out, they play 3 hours. No, you're just sitting there going, all right, this is now 9 hours of nonstop music, but they're not done. After the Allman Brothers play 3 hours with Dickie and Greg, no Dwayne, because Dwayne's dead. 1971, the motorcycle accident kills him and Barry Oakley, the same hairpin turn on a motorcycle. So he's gone. But which they didn't play, he's gone for him. But anyway, so everybody comes out for a jam, for a final jam. After this is all over, the Dead, the Allman Brothers, and the band for a final. I don't know what time this was. This must have been around 2 o'clock in the morning already. But there was one brief intermission of rain, but for the most part, it went off, and there really is no record of this. There's some kind of bootleg album, and there's some dispute as to what it is coming off the soundboard or something, and whether it's part of the rehearsal from the night before. They kind of been busted over this release. I remember I have to look into it again. I haven't read about it in a number of years, but there really is no clean version of that show, which was absolutely insane. That show was absolutely insane. Now, the reason I mentioned that, and then we've got obviously the Woodstock thing a couple of years before where the Dead leave, because they're going to be electrocuted. I think they played 4 songs and left, fear of electrocution. This thing was their sound system, so they had no fear of that. Oh, play this. This looks good. There I am. I'm in there somewhere, Huntley, with Fishman.
I think you're in the second one.
The second one, yeah. Okay,
well, that gives you an idea of the people. Yeah, you showed me some other footage earlier. I can't put that up.
What?
Some of the footage was a little risque, shall we say?
Oh yes, there was some nudity. I have to admit that. I have to admit that now for the people at home.
Well, I didn't put it up, but I looked at the footage like, well,
there's a lot of breastfeeding. I don't know. There's a big thing of public breastfeeding back then. I don't know if that still goes on at concerts or not. But what is this one here? Oh, there's Donna Gottschalk. Yeah, this is some silent footage. This is actually from the show. This is actually from the show. You see Kreutzmann back there. There's Phil Lesh. This is the stage. Yeah, wow. There's the dead wall of sound. Look at that, Eric. Holy cow. Wow, that's a show. This is not obviously the music from the show, but there's some other dead music. Just to see some video footage. That's great. That's rare. That is very rare. We could put this up on Locals, right?
Yeah, I can. I'll have to get it and redo it, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I remember going to Woodstock 2, which was in Saugerties. The band played at that one, a little scaled down. No Robbie Robertson. It also rained at that one. That was also a muddy bath of mud and crap. 1994, I want to say, was Woodstock 2. And I was living up there in Woodstock at the time. So that was quite easy. I think I was covering it for the weekly, actually. There may have been an assignment I had. That was a weird one because they actually had, they had, oddly enough, planted in the ground cash machines, you know, where you could get cash out of. Mm-hmm. And of course, they were broken into and the cash was removed immediately. That didn't work out so well. But then fires were set and it was just a crazy, crazy operation, Woodstock 2. But nevertheless, the Dead will continue to play and tour like we were talking about earlier. And Jerry's addiction towards heroin now becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. He quits a bunch of times. He goes back on heroin. It's on the down low, but he's getting fatter and fatter and fatter. And he's chain smoking, doing heroin. And he's now nodding out on the microphone. He's resting his head on the microphone itself, taking a break, standing up. That's how bad off he was health-wise. And they do a bunch of interventions secretly. Nobody knows this, but it's in their memoirs. They did a bunch of interventions on Jerry, and he wasn't happy about it, but they did do it, and he had to get clean. He gets clean. He goes on methadone, I think, at one point in the 80s and 90s. He's getting fatter and fatter. And then I think in 94, he goes to Betty Ford. Or I take that back. Early 95, he goes to Betty Ford. And he doesn't like Betty Ford, or maybe it's the spring of 95. He doesn't like Betty Ford because it's obviously too structured for him. And he transfers to some she place called Serenity Knolls in August of 95. Now, keep in mind, he, the year before, had gone into a coma, a coma from an overdose. He gets into a diabetic coma for 5 days. He's in a coma on machines the year before. And he comes out of the coma alive, and he has forgotten how to play guitar. He has forgotten all his songs. He's forgotten how to play, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. And he brings in this African-American friend of his, the keyboard player, Merle Saunders, who he played with over the years. And Merle Saunders, San Francisco guy, I think, patiently reteaches Jerry how to play guitar and his own songs. Absolutely astounding. It takes Jerry 9 months off the road to relearn how to play guitar and his own songs. His own songs. That's how far gone he was. And he and them, the Dead, supported so much infrastructure at this point. So many people worked for the Dead that they felt they couldn't stop touring or these people's lives would collapse. So many people were employed in this miniature counterculture family, the Dead family, that they felt pressure to keep touring forever. And they had been to Europe. They'd been to the pyramids. They had a lot of world tours. But now Jerry is getting sick and sick and sicker, and he goes to Betty Ford. But he leaves Betty Ford, and he goes to this place, Serenity Knolls, which is in Forest Knolls, California. Some she kind of bullshit place.
He didn't live that much longer after that, did he?
No. He dies that week. I mean, he's 53 years old. It was like a week after his 53rd birthday. He had friends smuggling in cigarettes and heroin. So I don't blame the place. Betty Ford's a lot tougher. That's not going to happen in Betty Ford. You know
So
what I
it
mean?
wasn't cancer then.
Oh no! Oh no! Oh no! It's listed as a heart attack. It's
Oh,
technically
okay.
listed as a heart attack, but he was. They had smuggled heroin in and also cigarettes and stuff like that, and he croaked in there. And obviously, a dark day for everybody. I mean, nobody forgets the day that Jerry died. If you're a deadhead, one of the darkest days in American history, music history. But he did it to himself. I mean, there's nobody to blame but him. He never promoted drugs at all. In fact, they never promoted any political cause whatsoever. They never got involved in any anti-war stuff. They never got involved in backing a political candidate. The only weird guy who does is Weir. And Weir is into like a lot of weird stuff. And I'd love to do just a whole show on Bob Weir, but we can't. So let me just say that Jerry's death, near the end, they started to come up with Jerry Garcia ice cream. They went to Ben and Jerry's, and he started to do a line of hand-painted ties. I mean, it was getting pretty. There's Ben and Jerry's. They, one of the Ben or Jerry, one or the other, says they went into the Scoop Shop one day. They have a shop in Vermont, I guess, which is a brick and mortar ice cream store. And on the bulletin board, some kid had written, "Why don't you make an ice cream for Jerry Garcia and call it Jerry Garcia?" So Ben or Jerry comes in that day and goes, "That's a brilliant idea." So they call up the dead, and the dead goes, "Yeah, we'll back that up. That's great." So they don't even know who the kid is. They eventually find the kid who wrote it. But they came up with Cherry Garcia, and they sent like 10 gallons of it to Garcia, who of course ate it in one night. Which didn't
I
help.
knew where it was going.
Right. It really didn't help Jerry so much having Cherry Garcia. The hand-painted ties, he was a graphic artist, Jerry. He also did a lot of sketches. He did a lot of finger painting and watercolors, and he had been doing that for 30 years. So somebody approached him about doing neckties. It was the strangest thing. Since nobody wore a necktie, I mean, they're not the greatest looking neckties. I don't even want them. And I like neckties. I mean, I've never really liked any of them. They just seem, I don't know. They're just weird.
Too hippie for you.
They're just kind of weird, but God bless them. I mean, so Jerry dies and the dead, takes a break thinking they're never going to be back, but they do come back in these different connotations. Now, here's the thing about Jerry's death. All of his wives come out of the woodwork, and I mean wives. Now, this is Mountain Girl. This is Bridget Meyer. There's a bunch of them. That's Mountain Girl there. Now, Mountain Girl, this is who's also Ken Kesey's girlfriend, and lives with Kesey. Like Jerry breaks up with her in the 70s, but she comes out of the woodwork. And there's Jerry with Mountain Girl, and there's about 4 other wives who were doing this. And of course, the last wife is Mountain Girl again with Jerry. Yeah, that's probably in the 1970. I don't know if you have some of the other girls that were his wives, because he's got about, I want to say 4 daughters with four wives. Like that's Trixie. That's one of his daughters.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
The ladies at home. There's
Trixie.
That's Trixie again. Yeah. There is a couple of these women, but the last one boxes out the others at the funeral. They always do this. They box them out, and you can't go to the funeral, and you're a piece of crap, and you're not getting in here. And at the ceremony for his funeral, yeah, that's the one he married in '94. He marries her. She's a documentary filmmaker, and she ends up with the estate, but more importantly than anything else, which is a lot of money. The funny story is, one of them speaks at the funeral and says, "Jerry told me that I was the love of his life," and the other 3 stand up and say, "He told me I was the love of his life." And it's kind of funny, but he did. He told all 4 of them that they were the love of his life.
Well, at the time.
At the time, he was telling the truth. Yeah. 3 daughters. 3 daughters. God help me, I can't figure out who's who at this point. It's a complicated mess of who's part of what show and what wife and what marriage. But that they all spin off into different foundations, the Jerry Garcia Foundation, different things like that. But the band all gets together again and begins touring. Now they have John Mayer playing guitar for them. I think they had they might have had trucks for a while and different Garcia people filling in for that seat. They're all still alive, oddly enough, playing together. I mean, Mickey Hart and the rest of them. Now, Mickey Hart's an interesting case. Like I said, I wanted to get back to Mickey Hart. He goes, Mickey Hart, I have a closer vibe with Mickey Hart because he is a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. So I've always had a special place in my heart for Mickey Hart man, actually. But Mickey Hart had a kid, and Mickey Hart's kid, forget about Lenny Hart. Lenny Hart dies eventually from a heart attack or something, natural causes. But Mickey Hart has a kid named Taro, T-A-R-O Hart, who's a musician. And Taro Hart is in LA, and he gets involved in a recording studio. He's a recording musician, and he's playing guitar or drums or multiple instruments. He's raised in the Dead family. He has a million parents because all the Dead family are his parents, essentially. And everybody knows Taro Hart, who's a Dead.
Like a commune lifestyle almost?
Yeah. Well, the whole Dead family is a giant commune lifestyle, right? So Mickey Hart's son, Taro, he's in a recording studio with a bunch of hip-hop guys like Black Thugs. And the leader of this group, it's like a session, says, why don't we go over to UCLA? There's a card game over there in the dormitory. In the middle of the recording session, he says, let's drive over to UC. This is in LA. He says, let's drive over to this card game with a bunch of students playing cards. So Taro drives the car, and these other hip hop artists or gang members, whatever you want to refer to them, go into this dorm. The lead guy, takes out a .38 revolver, puts it to the head of the kid who's running the card game. These are white college kids playing a card game in a dorm, and robs the whole dormitory at gunpoint. Okay, now Taro Hart never goes in there, and they all get arrested, and they are going to be put on trial for armed robbery. And Hart is now linked to the case, even though he's the driver, because he's part of the crime. He's looking at years and years in prison. So somehow he ends up with me, and he says, what do you think I should do? And he wants to flee the country because he doesn't want to go to do this time in Folsom. And not an unusual request, right? So he is confused about what to do. They bring in Robert Shapiro to the case in court. They bring in everyone. They say he's got a brain tumor. They say he was a driver. They try everything to get him out. And he's sentenced to 8 years of hard time in Folsom Prison, Eric. No record, no nothing. And he's already been sentenced. So he's come to me, and I am faced with a moral dilemma because I don't know what to tell this kid. He's asking me, should I flee? He inherited money. He's got access to a trust fund at this point. I think he turned 21 or 24 or some age where he able to flee. So his father tells him, Mickey Hart, says to meet me at the Silver Spoon, a restaurant in West Hollywood, and I'm going to help you. We think to flee the country, And he goes to this restaurant to meet his dad, and the sheriff's department pounced on him. His dad dropped a dime on him, and they all take him down right there in the restaurant. It's just a really unusual situation, but I worked with the kid for a number of months trying to deal with this thing, and Mickey Hart sent me this thing that I showed you on his album, Rolling Thunder. That's to me that he wrote. It gets a little emotional because of the situation. But anyway, I thanked Mickey Hart for that. And he was able in the prison to find deadhead prison guards, Mickey Hart, and actually pay them to keep an eye on his kid. And he did hard time. He didn't get a break, and eventually got out. And there's recordings of him. He's a great musician, the kid, and he married, has a kid himself. So there's kind of a happy ending to the story, I hope, as an artist and as a father with a beautiful child. So now it's the grandson of Mickey Hart, who is the son of Taro. And this event, showed me that things can go wrong for anybody. It doesn't matter if you're the son of a Grateful Dead drummer or not. And they weren't fingering him for anything except the lead guy. I think he got 20 to life. So he got sentenced with 8. But the lead guys who did this got, because there was a gun involved, got about 20 years. Also hard time. So I don't know what happened to them, and I don't even know who they were, to be frank. But Taro is a really good guy and a really great musician. And, I hope he can put it aside and come out clean, which he's out, obviously. But there was a lot of stuff that went on in there that, I don't know if fleeing was the right thing or doing the time was the right thing. I don't know to this day whether it was the right thing. It's really a hard decision for someone to make who's got some resources. You dealt with this guy. What's his name? The guy who died in the jail in Spain. McAfee, who had the resources to flee, and it didn't end up well for McAfee either. But I mean, if McAfee had turned himself in, it might have ended up the same way for McAfee if he had turned himself in. So, I mean, who knows? Who knows? I don't know what the correct answer is. It was one of the biggest moral dilemmas of my life, to be frank with you. It was really confusing about what was the right thing to do to advise this kid. And I don't know. I don't know I didn't really have a choice because they took him down anyway. So it didn't really matter. I didn't really have a dog in the game. But just anyway, so it's just my connection to the dead and what I've seen as a deadhead over the years, going full circle, from seeing them in these venues to actually trying to interact with the dead family at that point, which is typical of these America's Untold Stories. I always end up somehow being involved at the end of the story. But, I always loved the dead. They opened up doors of perception for me that would have been closed for me artistically, philosophically, and socially. And as we say, I do not regret the past, nor wish to shut the door on it. And people who know what that phrase means know what I mean.
Is that Aldous Huxley?
No, I'm just going to leave it at that.
Oh,
I don't regret what happened. But anyway, that's where we are today. I hope you enjoyed that. So
awesome. Start off. It's not Owsley, but it's Oswald.
It should be Owsley. That would be a better name for that thing.
Nah, he's Oswald. He's a patsy.
Okay.
It's established. He's everywhere. Right. We have merch down below. I think if you dig into it, I'll have to double check. There's tie-dye t-shirts for us.
I want that tie-dye t-shirt. Is that back?
I don't know. It was out. It's back.
I really got to get that tie-dye t-shirt.
I have to definitely order that. You can always support us on Locals. We'll try to put a couple things up on Locals, like that entire concert that he was at. There's some videos with that, and I'll upload that.
This is a great coffee table book about the history of the dead. If anybody wants to get this one, it's really a fantastic, with incredible art and tickets and photos and everything. It's one of the best books there is on the dead. Is that coffee table book? It's put out by the dead themselves.
Speaking of that, Mark has a PayPal.
Oh yeah.
People buy him books.
Right. We get. Here. This is the Rolling Thunder album by Mickey Hart, a solo album that Eric was showing us, and this is the thing we were looking at before, the original signature from Mickey. I mean, it's weird because I haven't listened to the Dead in a while. I just for the past couple of days went back on it and watching the movie, and we're going to put up some clips on Locals that are really rare. So if you join Locals, you'll get access to those clips if you're interested in this. The Dead is not just about the music. It's really, like I said, it's so embedded in the American culture because of their connection to the beats, connection to Kerouac, connection to Kesey, to Owsley. It's more than a band. And that's what I wanted to explain today. It's not about the music itself. It's about an American experience that transitioned from the beats to the counterculture. If that means anything to anybody, it's important to a lot of people, but it's also a part of American history that's untold.
By the way, really fascinating note about Locals. As I've said a bunch of times, you can follow us for free on Locals, but there is an option to support us for, added material and things like that. We are at 999.
Oh, come on.
People supporting
on.
us on local. So
Get
maybe
out.
somebody on this
Who's going to be
episode,
number 1,000?
somebody will take us to 1,000.
Holy cow, that's great, Hunley.
We'll become a 4-figure locals.
Wait, are we
community.
ahead of other groups? Where do we sit with this locals things compared to others?
You know what? We can look at that if anybody's actually interested.
I'm curious to see how we've been doing this for almost a year now, right?
We have been doing it for a year.
It was like 10 years though, Hunley. I swear to God.
Actually, I think we
got 100 episodes for Christ's sake. How many episodes do we have, Eric? How many? Do you know?
We have over 100.
No.
Yeah. We definitely have over 100. So.
Oh my God.
I'll have to look up when the anniversary date is. Let me see if I can.
No, we did get nuked, so there might be 2 anniversaries. Oh, and also, if you want Tom Wolfe's book, Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, Tom Wolfe, part of the new journalism that Hunter Thompson and others at the time. Tom Wolfe was a conservative, by the way. A lot of people don't realize that. And he comes in, and the Hell's Angels are in this. Sonny Barger. Okay, what is this? Empowering.
Yeah, if you ever want to see how shows are doing now, we're not trending on locals. I'm not sure why, because we're actually ahead of a lot of these people here who are trending.
Who are these trenders?
Just popularity contests. But let's go and look where we are. So
where?
Under culture.
Right.
And this is with everybody's support. It's a combination of people who follow us and people who support us. And you can see that we're ahead of Peter Schiff, Yomi Park. We're ahead of Breitbart.
We're ahead of Breitbart?
We're ahead of Project Veritas. We're ahead of Glen Greenwald.
Holy Christ.
Yeah, we're ahead of that umbrella guy, Lauren Chin, Dana Perino, Carpe Donktum, Gothics, Kevin Sorbo, who played in that, Buck Sexton. Got to be ahead of the CIA.
We're ahead of Buck Sexton, the CIA guy. That's great.
Yep, the Gaggle.
We're ahead of the Gaggle?
We're way ahead of the. I mean,
you know what? I don't think these people offer documents and scripts and books and PDFs like we do. I don't know. Maybe
Nick
we're crazy.
Ahead of him.
Do they have anything on their sites that they give away to the members?
I'm not sure. Everybody runs their own locals any which way they choose.
Because a friend of mine joined Dr. Drew and said there was nothing there on locals that was worth joining.
There are some who do that. They just kind of put stuff up there. We do try to genuinely interact with people on locals and really encourage everybody, please interact with each other.
I try to respond as much as I can, but I'm too busy reading these books to really dedicate my life to doing that, because I literally jump off the show and jump into the next show. I don't even know what it is, but I had to watch all this dead stuff I haven't looked at in 20 years. But enjoyable is all hell. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love doing it.
I'll put a link in the chat again, but we do have a link right in the show description.
Right.
And here's a link in the chat. Diane Thompson asked for that. Happy to provide that. Mm-hmm. And we also have gotten some super chats from folks who are supporting us directly right here.
Hold on, let me take a look at this. Dove Omega, deadhead by definition means ride for free. Well, I mean, the people do sell merch there and stuff. I'm old enough to remember no one rides for free. So there's some controversy already.
Well, there was controversy early on when we were playing the music.
To the story here.
Yeah, when we were playing the music and talking about it, it's like, okay, there's definitely a mixed crowd. Not everyone is a fan of the band. So.
Right. You don't need your own weed. It's really funny. I was at the Beacon one night. I'm sitting in the upper balcony, and these guys are smoking so much weed, I was gagging. I was smoking at the time, so I lit up a cigarette, and the guy turned around and said, "There's no smoking in here, bro." I'm sitting there to see a pot smoke, but guys literally smoking a bong at an Allman Brothers show at the Beacon. Thanks, Phil.
No smoking for you.
Right. Speaking of traumatic, the finger gag was traumatic for me. Okay. I thought I was getting a contact.
It's the same finger gag. I think it was a David.
It's the same finger gag we did in an earlier episode.
Yeah.
No, sadly, he's got to go do a bris.
He's got a mission.
Rabbi Weir has got to go do a bris. Catch up on Rumble. Thanks. Chad Mills in the house.
Thank you.
Tony Clifton, Eric Weir, the pics of Marco Woodstock.
Well, he wasn't supposed to be there, so
my grandfather went crazy. My grandfather called the state police. We went in on the back of some guy's car for both nights. and rode in and out of these back roads, some local kids, Timmy and Johnny Vandermeer, who live locally on the gas station. So I don't know how we got in and out of there. My grandfather flipped his lid.
Oh, damn, we got a veteran here.
Bill Kinsella, Mark, you could have interviewed me for this. You could have interviewed me over 200 shows, dead shows or just shows?
I'm guessing dead shows, but I don't know.
Okay,
He seemed to be. When I was glancing at the chat, he seemed to have a lot of knowledge in it.
Okay, all right, good to know. Stacy's in the house. All right,
Stacy. And look at this.
You just became your this guy, David March.
Yeah.
Oh my God, David March is Mr. 1000.
So that, fantastic. You know what? We've met a lot of milestones. This show hit 30,000 subs. My other show hit 60,000 subs yesterday or overnight. My third show hit 20,000. So it's been a really, really remarkable week. And we got another member here, Pete Garrison. Thank you.
Somebody else, Garrison's in the house.
So, yeah, I mean, I cannot thank everybody enough. You guys have been amazing supports. There's merch, PayPal, Venmo, locals, but really just
follow me on Twitter. That's always fun.
On Twitter, and you know what? And that's free. You can follow on Twitter for free. Just follow locals free. Subscribe to the show. Hit the like button.
Oh yeah, where's
Tell
that
a friend?
Remember we used to have the thing on the bottom.
We occasionally get that.
Yeah, that I like that. If you could only remember yourself to put up to remember to subscribe, you may not be in the shape we're in. You got to push the button, Hunley.
I know. I'm the weak AV club kid.
Right. Were you in the audiovisual squad in school?
No,
oh, because there was a squad that brought in the film projector.
Yeah. No, because in the 80s and the 70s, I mean, they were highly trained to roll in the projector because the damn teacher, and then have to say, no, turn the page this way to make it project up.
Oh, the overhead projector. Yes, that was an interesting.
Oh, yeah, that was part of the AV. Yeah.
I forgot about that. The overhead. Whatever happened to those things? The people they don't use that anymore.
No, they have computers now, and
computers that do that,
just literally project the computer up. On the screen, or sometimes they haven't built in now.
What about the mimeograph machine? You think that's still used?
Jesus, God, no.
You know what? I said the word photostat to someone a year ago, and they said, "What's photostat? What does that mean?" And they didn't know what photostat meant, and either did I, compared to what's available today. I don't.
Well, I mean, I go as far back as microfilm and microfiche.
Right.
I didn't really get. I mean, that's. Oh. Hey, Red Rooster, another new member.
That's 1,000. Oh no, it's a YouTube.
No, this is a YouTube member. So thank you. Yes, actually, this is a side thing that's going on, but Nate the lawyer is suing somebody called Christopher Boozy, who is a complete hack, attacking people on Twitter, etc., trying to get them thrown off. I've covered it with Layback News. If people want to check that out. I talked about it on Locals, and also have talked about it on the Nate and Eric show. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. If anybody wants to check that out and find out more, it looks like we're doing well. He needs $30,000. He should have it by tonight. The campaign started Wednesday night. So in less than 48 hours, $30,000 for legal bills.
Well, do you have any exit music that we could play for these people for the
weekend? I might have something here. So why don't we go ahead and go out with a little bit of a clip?
I'm happy for the other stuff, but we got to get back to the dead.
Yes, sir. So, I aim to please.
What do we have here? Do you have some sort of exit music that we can roll?
A little song, a little piece of a little song that people probably
play it as
heard.
long and as loud as you can. I'm here all day.
Yeah, well.
I'm not going anywhere. Just play it the whole song, Eric. Let's.